What I think about the Urantia book. This is a book I read about 10 years ago. I read it in 1 month, but I read the whole book. It's really long, it's like 5,000 pages. It's another one of those channeled books. Well, one Urantia person told me, because I went to a group for a few times in Boulder, that they locked these papers into a safe, and then they came back the next morning and like all these papers existed. But then I had another friend who was a Urantia person, and she said that it was just these various people who go into a trance, and then they would wake up the next morning and they'd have all this like paper written, and then they would find out they put it together. So that's kind of magical how that came about. So I'm going to go ahead and believe that. I believe everything anybody ever tells me. As those are the rules. You have to believe what people tell you until they contradict themselves, and you know that they know that they're lying. So anyway, so they obviously went into a trance and they connected with their higher selves and they wrote the book. But I think these people who wrote the book were fundamentalist Christians, so I think their preconceived notions about stuff. This book was written back in 1920s. Kind of clouded their judgment a little bit because they don't believe in reincarnation. It mentions 3 different times in the Urantia book that reincarnation does not exist. Once you die, you go to these different worlds, and you go to these other worlds, and it's kind of like a progression through different planets. I believe in reincarnation. So, and then there are some other. The Urantia book is kind of like an league of its own because it's not really consistent with the other channel books like Edgar Casey and other books written by aliens who like to tell us about our past. So it's kind of like a good read. I mean, I'm fascinated by reading it. I have the whole thing on MP3, and I love to listen to it. Just because it was written, there's a lot of good science in it. But I think it was the science of like that we knew from back then. You know, like they believed in that the dinosaurs made oil, and I actually don't believe that anymore. I believe oil comes from the sun, energy from the sun. But it's a fascinating book because it goes through the whole history of aliens coming to Earth and helping start civilizations, and then the different races starting simultaneously, and then spreading out from there. And I mean, I believe all of that, so it's definitely fascinating to read. And I mean, I think everybody should try to write their own little Urantia book. Well, not everybody, but I think it's totally commendable to try to make up your own little history, because probably a lot of the stuff you pull out of the air is actually going to be true. I think that's how it works. So I learned a lot about insights, so many insights into like the purposes of religion and the purposes of all the different stages of society. See if I can think of an example right now. Purposes of different races. There's actually a purpose to having different races. For you to have a bond with people of your own kind was actually a good thing for a long time, until of course you decide you're ready to have one world, and then of course you have to get rid of all those racial tendencies that people have. But so I think different attitudes, they're appropriate for a long time, and then they change, and then you have to change your attitude. But and the part about Jesus was really good, because they kind of compared Jesus and God as your parent. And so, and even the aliens that come down here, as they kind of feel themselves responsible for us, and they're not successful in their lives unless we are successful, kind of like parents wanting, basing the success of their life on the success of their children. And I think that's a really good way to look at God and look at the aliens who come down here to try to help us, and Jesus. So would I recommend the Urantia book? If you like a story, I would totally recommend it. It's a really big book, and you like lots of insights, I would recommend it. Don't just believe everything it says, but I mean, it's good practice to read books like that aren't completely true. Probably it's a good idea that books written aren't completely true, because it forces people to contradict each other. And this guy's, what he read in this book is different from what this guy read in this book, and this idea of this guy is different from this guy idea of the other guy. And when they and then they can clash. You want people to argue. once people know how to argue without getting upset and screaming and fuming at the mouth, and kind of like those people in Crossfire or like that other guy. Once people realize, like, learn how to argue, then arguing could be great. I would love somebody to send me a video arguing. Somebody who doesn't agree with me, come on, argue with me. Maybe you're right. Maybe you'll win the argument. I'd love to be beaten in an argument. That'd be cool, because then that means that I learned something. Anyway, so that's the Urantia book. It's a cult book. So I had to respond to it. Oh, and it changed my life. It was one of the most impacting books I've ever read. I loved it. It was fascinating to read. So